there, this is Fiona with another CyanTrigger tutorial. Today we're going to go over how to create a basic beer pong game. Check the description below for useful download links. Be sure to get the latest version of the VRChat SDK and CyanTrigger. There's also a downloadable version of this prefab. So this game is basically 4 parts. We have the cup itself, which will detect when a ball collides with it. We have the ball. We have these respawner buttons, which just moves the ball over to your side of the table. And then we have the reset button that sets the game back to the initial state. Okay, so let's see what we're supposed to have happen here. So the ball, when it encounters the cup will play an effect and disappear. The respawner button will bring the ball back to the side of the table. One thing that you may see is like when the cups on this side are hit, the ball will automatically respawn to the other side. So it kind of like controls the turns that way. And then the reset button will reset the game to the initial state. There we go. Okay, let's go build it. So let's start with the easiest part of the system, which is the ball itself. So here I have a sphere, and I'm going to make sure that we have a non-trigger collider, and we've added a bouncy physics material to this. Now let's go ahead and add the VRC pickup script, and that will automatically add a rigid body. That rigid body, we want to make sure it's using gravity, it's not kinematic, and we want to have a little bit of angular drag so it doesn't roll too far. And then we also need to add object sync. This is the way that everyone sees the same position of the ball. That's it. The downloadable prefab has slightly more logic on the ball to add audio and some other features, but for now, just a simple pickup is adequate for our purposes. One last little thing, let's go into VRC pickup. Let's turn on the auto hold. This just makes it easier for desktop players to throw the ball. So let's build the respawner button now. On this object, I have a mesh collider, which is just the disc in the back here. That is the only part that's interactable. I don't want to have an interact on this front part, otherwise it might interfere with picking up the ball. So I have a custom mesh here on this object. That's going to be our highlight. What is actually stopping the ball are these 3-box colliders. And then we have the respawn transform, which is where we want the ball to come to whenever we respawn it. Okay, so now let's go ahead and just set up the logic for this part. Let's add our CyanTrigger. Okay, so let's go ahead and add some variables. The first variable we're going to need is our game object, which is our ball, called ball object. We're going to need, let's go ahead and bring that in right now. Now we're going to need the transform that it moves to, and we'll call that respawn transform. And we've had that right here. Let's add our respawn event. I'm going to make it a custom called respawn. And in there, let's go ahead and get the information that we need. Okay, so in order to make somebody drop the ball first, because you can't move it if someone's holding it, we're going to need the VRC pickup script. Okay, so we need a variable that is VRC pickup. And I'm going to call this one ball pickup. And then to teleport it, since it's an object synced object, we're going to use teleport to, which is off of the object sync components. We're going to need to have that as well. So let's look up VRC object sync, make that a variable, and we're going to call this ball sync. And the last thing that we need is the rigid body so that we can set the velocity to 0. So let's go ahead and make a rigid body variable and call this ball rigid body. All right, so let's collapse those down. Let's go about getting all that information. Okay, so game object, get component. And here is where you have to type things in and make sure that you don't screw up. So first let's pick ball object. The first thing that I want is ball pickup. Now here in parentheses, that's what we're looking for. We need to type that in exactly. If those two things don't match, it's not going to find that component. It's going to throw an error over here in your console. So over in the console, you'll see a little Udon behavior stopped working probably. It's most likely because you typed something wrong. So let's now duplicate this and do our other two. So now we want the sync. So we're going to call this VRC object sync. Make sure you get the capitalization correct as well. And one more. The rigid body. And here we're looking for rigid body. Okay, now that we have all the information, let's go ahead and do our actions. Okay, so the first thing we need to do, if someone is holding it, we need them to drop it. So let's call that on the VRC pickup, drop. There it is right there. And the object we want them to drop, of course, is the ball pickup. Great. So the next thing we want to do is then to teleport it, and we're going to do that with object sync. You can also teleport a game object by setting the transform directly. However, since this is an object synced object, teleport to is the preferred way to do it. All right, so let's go ahead and set this right here, ball sync, and the target location is going to be our respawn transform. And lastly, let's do the rigid body, set velocity. I'm not worried about angular velocity. Go ahead, let it spin. And so that is going to be our ball rigid body, and we're setting it to 0. Just leave those fields all at 0. Now we want to make sure that when this respawn is called, everybody sees this happen. All right, so we're going to go ahead and make this a send to all. And then finally, we need to actually call this respawn from this button. We're going to add the interact. So let's go ahead and add interact. And from here, we just call that CyanTrigger, send custom event. And we're going to copy paste. The last piece we might want to do is to change the use text just so that our tooltips show up. And we're going to call this, say, respawn ball right here. So when you hover over it, you know what that button does. Let's move on to the cup itself. Okay, so here in this cup, we have a lot of things going on. The cup visual, right? So this is this mesh renderer here. Under that, we've got the liquid. Just a little flattened cylinder. We have the collider. This is so the ball can bounce off the rim and really annoy you when it doesn't go in by just a hair. All right. We've got some particles that play when you hit it inside, and sound that plays as well right there. Okay. Now let's go ahead to the interesting part, which is the detector. So we've got a capsule collider. Let's go ahead and turn our gizmo so you can see that in there. There's our capsule collider. Okay, and so I've made sure that that collider is trigger so the ball can actually go inside. Let's add our CyanTrigger. We want to think about late joiners at this moment before we start going crazy with our logic. Late joiners will not see the ball enter the trigger. We need to tell them that it already happened somehow. Okay, and the way that we do that is with synced variables. So a synced variable is something that the network holds on to, and then when a late joiner comes, it tells them, oh, hey, this variable is this value now. And so combined with a sync variable and using onVariableChanged as an event, we can tell late joiners everything they need to know about the system to catch them up. All right, so let's go ahead and build our system based on late joiner sync. And so let's start off with a Boolean, especially something here. Is the cup still on the table? Or is it gone? 2 states, yes or no. Booleans are great for that. So let's go ahead and add a bool. I'm going to call this is it. And we're going to change this to synced. When we do that, we now have some options for what kind of sync. In this case, manual without a request is just fine. If we wanted something constantly moving, constantly updating every frame, we would use continuous. That can be performance heavy. Manual means we say when the information goes. The vast majority of cases, manual without a request in CyanTrigger is the way to go. So let's start there, okay? All right, so now we have our synced variable. Some other information we're going to need is the ball itself. Let's go ahead and add that game object. And I'm going to call this beer pong ball. Let's go ahead and drag it in since we already have it. When the ball goes into the cup, I would like for that ball to respawn to the other side of the table. So in order to do that, we already have that logic. In fact, we just built it, right? It already exists in the respawners. So let's put that in as a variable itself. So how do I call that? I'm going to make a variable that is a Udon behavior variable. Okay, so Udon behavior. And I'm going to call this respawner Udon. All right, and this is where we drag in which one we want. In this case, I've only got one ball respawner, and I can drag it in here. In our game, we're going to have 2. When I have all the cups on this side, I'll tell them to respawn over here, and vice versa. All the cups on this side will point to the respawner over here. So we don't need to fill that out right now. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that blank. Another reason to leave that blank is this is going to be a prefab. That prefab isn't going to be able to carry that reference with it. Let's start by making a custom that says what happens when we actually get a bullseye. So I'm going to call this bullseye. A nice habit to have is when you have a custom and it's something you're likely to want to have to debug, is to add a debug log at the beginning of it saying that that was called. Okay, so let's go ahead and add debug log, choose string, and you can just type in what you want here, in which case I'm going to say bullseye called. Just a good habit. All right, so now what do we actually want to have happen? Let's play those particles. Particle system, play. All right. Now here we can just drag this in directly. Particles. And with children, yes, because these particles, there's actually two. All right, now we want to have the audio source play. Okay. Audio source. Let's do play one shot. Go ahead, put the splash audio in there. And then our clip, beer pong hit is the clip that I want. All right, you don't have to have it in the audio source component, but I like to have it match just so that I can remember what it is. And then what we need to do is then turn off the visuals, the collider of the cup. All right, so after those things go, we don't want to disable this whole cup. We have a synced variable on this object. If we turn off this whole object, that variable will no longer be synced. Okay, so then let's game object set active. I've got two things that I want to disable. I want to disable the visual, bam, and the collider, bam. One more thing we need to do is we need to disable this detection collider. So let's go ahead and do collider set enabled to false, and we'll drag in the ball detector, false. Now let's add the event to make this happen, and that's going to be an onTrigger enter. Okay, so let's find that under collision, onTrigger enter, and let's add in our debug log. All right, string, and I'm gonna say collision detected. You want one person to control what is happening here so you don't have conflicts and weirdnesses. All right, so first let's check to see, is it that person that saw the collision? Let's go ahead and do an if right there. So this was covered in the player chimes tutorial. If you have not used the if before, I recommend checking that out. All right, so here I'm gonna call this ball owner, and this is the variable, right? So this is the yes or no, pass or fail. Okay, so let's add networking is owner. Okay, so I want three things here. So I'm going to select this one just to be extra clear. Is the local player the owner of the ball? If so, and we're going to say if it is yes, they are the ball owner. If it is no, they're not the ball owner. So let's just set ball owner to that value, yes or no. We have a synced variable on this. That's what we're going to change. We want to say hit is true now. You have to make sure only the owner is setting that variable. Nobody else gets to change a synced variable, only the owner. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that ball owner also owns this cup. Let's go ahead and set it up. Networking set owner. Drag that into our condition body. Is going to own this game object. Okay, now let's go ahead and set that bool set. Drag it in. True is hit. Here is where we want to now respawn that ball. So here's where we use that Udon behavior variable. So we're going to do send custom event. So Udon behavior, send custom event. So let's go ahead and do that right here. We're going to use that variable. So the respawner Udon. And the thing that we want to use is, do you remember the name of it? I happen to remember. I called it respawn. Respawn. One last thing that we need to do is make sure that this collision is only the ball that's causing this collision and not anything else. So we're going to change this from VRC direct to game object. And here we're going to choose our ball right there. So by doing that, that ensures that this logic only happens when that collision is the beer pong ball and not some other random pickup in the world. So now we've detected the collision. We know what we want to have happen when that collision happens, but we have not actually called that from here anywhere. We have made a change though. We changed that Boolean. And this is where we use onVariableChanged. So the same thing will happen if you're in the room at the moment, or if you join late and you just get the information as you join. And that event is going to be using onVariableChanged. Okay, so the variable that we're changing, we're looking for is hit. This is the variable. Whenever this variable changes, this stuff's going to happen for you. All right, we want to see, did it change from false to true or true to false? Okay, so do special if I'm going to write changed to hit. Okay, so it becomes true. All right, and so then our little test to see if that happened is going to be bool equals. So if is hit is now true, change to hit is true. Okay, this is where we call bullseye. So let's go ahead and call our custom event. Make sure that's inside the condition body. This CyanTrigger, copy paste, copy paste. There we go. What if it wasn't? What if it's not true? Let's add in our else. Special else. Now, this is where we reset it. Make our life easier. We already have all that stuff. Boop, 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 boop. Up in bullseye. Let's go ahead and collapse these down. Is these two. Let's duplicate them. Now drag them back down here. Bam. True. And this one. True. Okay, so we're now going to enable the detector, enable those. So when the variable changes, it's going to do the right thing. So when we use this reset button, we need to have a way of resetting everything. So let's go ahead and add an event, and I'm going to give that a custom, and I'm going to call this reset. Oops, spell this correctly. Okay, when this reset gets called, remember what we said, that only the owner of the object gets to change a synced variable. And we need to change a synced variable here. So rather than putting in an if statement in this case, let's just go ahead and make it, you can only be called by the owner. All right, so reset's called by the owner, and let's go ahead and just set that bool. Set back to false is hit. You want to make sure the information only ever has one path to everybody. So in this case, owner, only the owner gets to do this. They do it locally. It's sent out via the synced variable. Now that we've built our cup, we can prefab it. The way you prefab it is you take the object right here, and then you're going to drag it somewhere in your project down here. So you just kind of drag it in here, and it's going to make a prefab. Now I've already done that. I've already got a beer pong cup prefab right here, so I'm not going to make a new one. So I'm going to go ahead and enable all of these guys. These guys I've already set up. I'll go ahead and disable our tutorial one right there. The other thing we're going to do, let's go ahead and take this respawner, and we're going to duplicate it to make the other side. Great. All right, now let's set up our reset button. All right, so we've got our CyanTrigger added right here. Now let's go ahead and add our events. So first let's add the what happens, and I'm going to call this reset cups. All right, and all I need to do here, we already built how you reset things. So we just need to send that custom event to all those cups to tell them to reset. Okay, so now let's get all of those cups dragged into here. Now there's 20 of them. That would take a long time to drag each and every one in. So let's do our little trick. Lock the inspector. Let's search for that ball detector, which is on each prefab. So I have the example one over there, which are all disabled. So let's just take the enabled ones. Easy way to tell, drag it into the header. We should have 20. Perfect. Size 20. Okay, close this, unlock the inspector. All right. Oh, go back to our reset button. There they all are. So when we do reset cups, it's going to call 20 of them. Call reset on each and every one. Now we need to do the interact. Add interact. And let's remember, change the interaction text here. Reset all. That way people will know that's what happens when you push that button. All right. And the things that we want to have happen is we're going to call this custom. CyanTrigger, send custom event. Copy paste. We also want to respawn that ball. Okay. And so here we need to pick a side. So we're going to do another send custom event. What did we call it? Let's just use this one. We called it respawn. All right, so let's copy, go back to our reset button. It was this. Let's put an input right there. Okay, so it's always going to start the game with the ball on that side over there. We have to do a little bit of tedious drag and drop work here though. Remember how each one of these cups had a udon that it was looking for outside of the prefab? Now's where we have to pay the piper. Let's go in each one of these. Okay, this on the side, I want to move over here. B was over here. So let's go ahead and grab B, put it in this side. So here, you can see B was our respawner. And then let's go ahead and do that with each and every one of these. We have to drag it in to each one at a time. So we'll just speed right through this and come back. Okay, that's the B side. Let's alt click to collapse that. Now let's do the A side. All right, all those are done. Let's collapse these as well. This should be ready to go. Let's give it a try. Okay, here we are. Let's grab the ball, drop it in, and see what happens. Okay, the effect played. Over here, the ball respawned over here. Okay, so now if I drop it into one on this side, try to get it in there, the ball should respond over here. Great. Now let's test our reset button. That worked. Let's test the manual respawner buttons. Yep, came in over there. Came in over there. Okay, so we've passed the single player test. That's great. The next step would be to check this either in-game with a buddy or in the local testing with 2 clients. Definitely make sure whenever you have networked logic that you always test it in the network and you test it in-game. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.